All right. Hello, everybody. Hey, Joel.
I
Great to have you here. Um, I'm speaking today with Joel, who is the founder of B2B which is the world leading information provider for B2B marketing teams. Um, Been around for 20 years, this organization. And I think really interestingly, for me was the last ABM conference was for me the first one, which has been around for 9 and 10 years, which is really remarkable, being so early to the game of ABM. Um, and then also building out of it the community of Propolis, which is really helping GTM leaders, marketers improve their game and scale up. So I'm really super excited to have you and to speak with you about these topics. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So I think we'll just cut straight to the jugular here. And one of the topics that we wanted to discuss and unpack is really GTM. It's been kind of the buzzword that everybody's been talking about. So I'm asking you, Joel, what is GTM?
Well, it's as a buzzword, it gives everyone entitled to make their own definition, right? But in terms of how I understand it and how I see it, it tends to be just that mix of routes in which you go to market, how you address the market, and there are different ways to do that. And I mean, typically they seem to be divided, in my experience, into kind of a more a mass market approach, a more demand generation approach, or a more account-based marketing approach, which is more targeted, or can be very targeted, or it can be a little bit less targeted. But it's more seeking to understand the decision-making unit as a whole. Or the third kind of pillar to this tends to be the kind of channel route where you look at working with partners to go to market. So those are the three primary pillars. I know that some people see it a bit broader than that, and there's obviously the role of sales that weaves into that along the way. But those are the primary things, and those things are shifting in terms of the use of technology, the use of agencies, and how decision making unit prioritizes and who can reach what. So it's a kind of constant state of flux, but I think it's probably in more flux now than it has been for a while.
Right. So you mentioned that change and transformations. What are the key transformations in go-to-market and B2B go-to-market that you've been witnessing, for the past couple of years?
Well, I think that the role of ABM generally has just continued to grow and grow. And then, but there's like a bit of a schism within even ABM itself, with the kind of the notion of the kind of program, the pyramid of ABM, with the more programmatic approach, and then underneath that, theoretically, you've got demand generation as a mass market approach. There's a massive blur between that. Where does kind of programmatic ABM end and demand generation begin? Depends who you talk to. And some of the people who are purists who are doing one-to-one ABM, they would definitely regard the programmatic end of the spectrum as demand generation. So there's a vagary there. There's also the role of channel partners and channel marketing, which becomes more and more important. Can often become a route in when times are tough, kind of economically. You start to rely on channel partners even more. And that's something which we've seen heard a lot of talk about, but not necessarily much evidence that it's being used more and more. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I think, Abhishek, we were talking about this earlier on. At the same time, there's been a lot more conversation in the last few years around the role of brand in B2B, which no B2B marketer would ever deny is anything other than vital. But at the same time, a lot of a lot more of the emphasis and the spend was more on the measurable kind of demand generation side of the equation, whereas there's been a lot of pressure from lots of sources and lots of suggestions, which is helpful to a degree, and I would agree, to move it back on the brand side of things. So that's kind of muddied the water further. So we've seen it's kind of a flux in several different dimensions at once, I'd say.
Yeah, I think we're seeing this very significant shake in kind of traditional structures. So when we got into the business 15, 20 years ago, there was a very clear playbooks, methodologies, even jargon was pretty much steady. And I think we've seen that very dramatic accelerated shift for the past few years. And I'm curious, kind of what are the reasons behind that? Why have those things that have worked before and we were content with them, right? We were content with classic lead generation, and we were content with those kind of dichotomies that we kind of used to describe. Why are they not working anymore? Why do we need to change?
Well, one, did they ever work? That's a question. Was it just the best thing we could do? I mean, I amount of time. I mean, I was there for the ride. Okay, with the when the marketing automation vendors arrived, and that was a great transformation that you saw with them. But I think even the kind of the most kind of some of many of the early adopters in that world would say if it ever worked, I'm not sure it works now. Perhaps it works for a certain segment of the market, but you're talking to one individual within a complex product or service within a decision-making unit. How much are you ever going to influence them, no matter how much great content you send? So, did it ever work? Is one question. Another question is literally hype from the vendor side, right? There's loads of some of the suppliers and vendors and agencies and consultancies and analyst firms in the B2B sector are excellent marketers themselves. So sometimes it's quite useful to have something new to sell. Right now, I'm not suggesting Trendim would put into this category at all, Abhishek. I'm sure you guys are totally objective in your thinking, but there are people out there who like to sell snake oil, and if the snake oil didn't exist, they'd invent it, right? So there's a bit of that going on. And also, but I think probably on a less cynical perspective, buyers are changing, right? Buyers' expectations are changing. They're becoming more sophisticated. What works in terms of reaching them doesn't work. What worked yesterday isn't going to work today. They're self-directed. They don't. They aren't waiting for your email. They don't want. They don't want. They don't want your email. They want to get the content that they need at that particular point, and that's what they will respond to. And they're a bit more consumer like in their behavior. It's still not B2B is still different from B2C, but they're more consumer like in their consumption. They expect sophisticated, entertaining engagement patterns. That does play to brand, but they also want the technical stuff at the right time as well. So those are three reasons for me why we're having a different kind of a dialogue now. Part of it is supply driven, part of it is didn't work in the first place, and part of it is because the landscape's changing, and that makes it fun for you and I because it would be boring if everything stayed the same, wouldn't it?
Totally, totally, yeah. To some extent, but it does feel like the whole world is accelerating and changing, and like I'm like, okay, maybe somebody put the brakes on a bit. Um, but for startups, this is prime territory, disruption and change. You mentioned the fact that whether it actually ever worked as kind of one question, and then the other one was changes that we as buyers are going. I think that's always interesting to when you talk to marketers, they kind of sometimes forget that they're also buyers and they put a different hat and they say, no, this is how they would buy, but I would buy differently, right? I want to research on oil, but they would fill a form and speak, to a sales rep. When in fact, we're all playing both roles. And I think one of the things going back to attention as being one of the key drivers or resources that are changing in our world, the influx of information and our need to limit access to information and to guard our attention is really forcing us to be much more selective in kind of who we're letting in. And I think in that respect, when we're talking about companies trying to capture attention at the end of the day, we're seeing kind of through ABM, I think, we're starting to understand how buyers actually buy. I think that may have also led us to realize once we understand what is really happening, then we now need to realize, okay, we need to adapt to that way. They're buying anonymously, they're doing the research alone, they're reading the content alone. If we just wait for them to fill a form to download an ebook and then try to engage with them, we're probably in the wrong space there. Do you see that too, in the sense ABM didn't change the way that we sell, but helped us uncover the way that we buy to some extent?
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, I think that the way we buy, I think it's both things happen at the same time. We've, as you say very eloquently, we understand better what people do now. But at the same time, people have, we're responding in this increasingly short attention span, immediate world. I heard somebody quite a stat recently that we're going to have to work 3 times faster in 5 years' time than we did 3 years ago. Like, that's terrifying. I don't want to work quite 3 times. But you know what I mean? Like, everything is expected to happen now, and we haven't got time to hang around the way we might have been. You can't prevaricate or delay decisions. So I think it's happening. Those two things are happening at the same time, and marketing has to respond. But I think we'll also think in this, Avishai, though, also is the role of sales, which we can't forget, because sales is important underpinning this. And I think in terms of the shift to demand to orient to ABM oriented structure. The reason that ABM always stands out to me is because it provides that's much better dialogue between marketing and sales and helps them understand. Helps them work in partnership. But one of the reasons why it didn't work, or marketing, my demand generation is harder to make work, is because that transactional nature, that kind of suck the lead over the fence and hope for the best thing. That always seems like wishful thinking. And the world of lead generation is can be a murky one at best. So I feel like what ABM does is it provides a contract, even if it's the programmatic end, it still provides a much better frame of reference and way for them to work together. And I think that's progress that we've seen in this period as well.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned sales. I'm curious, when I'm looking at the evolution of the sales, methodologies, I see them evolving organically or changing, but I think marketing and especially that go-to-market piece is really being transformed from the ground up. It's really being changed. I remember when, 15 years ago, marketing was a server of sales and the fact that they were providing them these, leads. It was a quantity-based or a deliverable-based kind of approach where we need to create the assets, we need to set up the events, and we bring in the leads. And I think there is such a pivotal role for marketers now in crafting the discussion and in guiding the conversation and really being at the forefront of who really is aware of your company. Are you seeing that as well in
Oh,
this growing role and importance of that function?
100%, 100%. I mean, marketer is increasingly and should be recognized as a strategic driver, a provider of value to the organization. It's not a sales support function, and the companies that get that are the ones that are succeeding. And it's not to position it as a power struggle is just to frame it in the wrong way. It's not helpful. It's about partnership and it's about how both entities, and that's why the way the kind of the revenue as a structure works, or at least has meaning in my opinion. I'm not saying it's the only way to work, but where it's relevant is that it provides a construct for them to work together collaboratively to similar aims, rather than be fighting against each other or worse, blame attributing. So yeah, it's you're totally right. It's changed the marketing's ability to deliver that value and ability to lead that the whole discussion is so much better than it was in the past, and that's really good news.
So, we talked about those challenges, and I think, a lot of people, when they see that, sometimes it can be a bit intimidating, right? We need to change approaches. One of the things that, I've been also hearing at the conference is this importance in terms of alignment, not just with the sales, but also with leadership. This effort to educate leadership in the fact that the world is changing, and it's not just about us executing that well-trodden playbook. It is about our role, or the marketing leader's role, in educating the organization in terms of the new activities and how to measure them. So how do you see kind of this challenge of GTM leaders, of marketers in educating leadership? What are some examples or things that you've seen, you came across, maybe some examples in how they've been able to do that? Because, I think a lot of times marketers tend to fail because they haven't been able to communicate effectively what they're trying to do. Maybe they've been measured by wrong measures, or like you said, it's been credit wars, right? So did marketing really contribute or not? So maybe walk us through a little bit of your experience in that part of educating leadership and the importance of it.
Well, it's a brilliant question, Avishai, and I tell you, if I could bottle that answer, I'd be a very, very rich man. Because there's no simple solution. It's complex. It takes time. It requires nuance. But the good news is that it's about marketing, right? Marketing's got to do marketing, and
Communication, right?
communication. Yeah. The bad news is that, as you said, we haven't been as good at it as we could have done in the past, and I think that's possibly why um, there are so many. And I'm speaking to some national characteristics here, right? If you the CMOs that I meet in the States, given their role, they're brilliant communicators, and they're super engaged with their boards, and there's a kind of culture where they are able to play those roles. So they tend to do that really, really well. I think the challenge for me seems to be that Marketing shouldn't be seeking to educate the board around what marketing is, because that's the wrong way round. Marketing needs to be it's a subtlety of marketing, talking to the board in a language that they understand and being to refer and be able to tell stories and frame the message in a way that the board understands. So if you're going to try and teach the CFO around kind of account engagement, you're probably going to be an uphill struggle at best. But you need to be trying to tell stories and take them on a journey to understand what you're trying to achieve and why that's important. And that might mean they're not going to understand everything what you want to say. You can't tell them everything; they won't get it. It's about building trust, and it's about communicating. Making sure you understand their objectives, and then being able to then push for the longer term. And in some situations, it's going to be harder than others. We know that so many of our kind of companies in the mid market are, uh, owned by PE or VC organizations, and they're less interested in brand, less interested in those things because they're looking to a defined timeline. And so it's always going to be harder to communicate those messages to those individuals, those and that collective group as well. So it's about measuring your message to it. So there is, like I say, there's no simple answer. I'm sorry if some of that is understood before, but that's I have had this conversation numerous times, and that those kind of things are the only solutions. It takes time.
Yeah, and I think to your point that there's been always an uphill battle of marketers because I think there's always been, I wouldn't say mistrust, but there's always been these accusations of those, the marketers who are waving their hands, but they're really struggling to really show where they move the needle. And I think one of the transitions, if we go back to the beginning of our conversations, we moved from a very structured volume-based approach that said I was able to generate so and so leads, and then you're basically bringing the credit wars or the blame wars where the leads are shit and you can't close them and all of that stuff, right? So we've been around that, but now that we're kind of shifting away, I think one area that is still not very solid is what is our golden KPIs, our main KPIs that we are aiming for, and that we can also demonstrate that are impacting revenue, because we all know we are looking to generate pipeline and revenue. I think one of the things that have been started to go that we're missing is those leading indicators. One of the things that I've been hearing from other leaders, leads used to be leading indicators. That is no longer the case, right? We've been seeing this transition that they have, and in the ABM conference, Kerry Cunningham, right, from Sixth Sense was mentioning the fact that buyers engage at such a late stage of their buying journey that it is no longer about being an indicator of intent. It's already, right, a lagging indicator there. So I think that's something that would be interesting to hear if you found any frameworks or structures, maybe within the ABM context, that is helpful in kind of building a foundation for that discussion with non-marketers, with non-GTM
Well,
people.
but the expression you used, leads no longer being the leading indicator. I heard you use that at the event in London in HMS Belfast in the
Right.
September, was it? I can't remember,
On the
and I
boat,
love
right?
that
Yeah.
on the boat. Yeah, it's a. If you don't know London, it's a big old warship on the Thames in the middle of London, and there was an event that Trent Demon ran on there, and it's a very iconic location for an event. And I heard you use that expression. I loved it, and I still love it. I think it's absolutely brilliant. So I don't know, maybe you've been using it for years, but I just thought it was really resonant. In terms of the answer to the question, what? So okay, if not leads, then what? And it does kind of depend on what type of ABM you're actually using, because historically in the UK, certainly we've been more orientated around the one-to-one, one-to-few. So you know exactly who you're targeting. There's no surprises. Um, so it's probably around account engagement are more of the things that you're looking for. You're looking at, often can be one company, it can be a handful of companies. So it's about those, which members of that organization are engaging with it. And I'm not going to claim to be an expert on leads, and it's something I've been delving into more and more. It's interesting looking at our on metrics and ROI. It's not one of my specialist subjects on my from when I embark on my quiz career when I retire. But one of the things we've been doing is looking at the bit interesting B2B marketing awards, and it's really interesting how and I published some stats about this and about how ROI was published as the kind of primary metric of success in campaigns. And actually, sometimes the ROI comes in at thousands, like 5,000 to one. And what they do at that point is they're taking the maximum possible value that could be extracted from a campaign at the
Mhm.
point where you created an opportunity. And we all know that not 100% opportunities are going to close. It's more like if you're doing very well if it's 20%. So there's a bit of kind of um, politics, shall we say, wishful thinking, perhaps in some of that reporting. But yeah. So anyway, sorry that I digressed a bit slightly from there. But I would say that's so when you're talking about those kind of that one to view, it's probably more around that kind of the depth of granular engagement of different members of that decision making unit is probably what you should be looking at.
So basically, when we're talking about ABM and that ABM approach, what you're basically saying is that maybe specifically in the UK, that was a thing maybe before it would even was being scaled out. That more personalized approach to kind of surround an account and understand whether we've been able to move them and nudge them kind of forward in that direction. And I love that because I think this is probably the only way today to be able to move somebody in the direction that you would want them. And just regarding that, and maybe connecting it also to propolis in the community, one thing that I've been seeing, I don't know if you've been seeing that as well, is that in the deals that we are seeing enter the pipeline, we're seeing almost all of them some aspect of a referral, of a champion, of an advocate that really facilitated that at some point, versus those that didn't have that, which are really at completely different closing rates. And if we kind of continue that trajectory, at least in my view, we may be seeing in the future it as a necessity to have a support group, a support mechanism, if it's an agency partner, if it's a community, that without that, there's very little likelihood of you getting the deal. Is this something that you also been seeing from your side?
Absolutely, absolutely. The power of advocacy is growing exponentially, I think, growing strongly. Um, and I think it's partly down to it. I mean, it goes right back to the point you asked at the beginning: why is go-to-market changing? And I think it's because trust is eroding, and we're all bombarded with messages. Every brand's trying to get in our face all the time. Yeah, content. You're getting. I mean, interesting to know how AI is going to play out on this one, but everyone's able to create content instantaneously, and so there's just so much of it around. How much is any good? Does Is not necessarily a correlation between quality of content and quality of brand or robustness of product and service. So trust goes out the window, or trust can be compromised, and we'll become cynical and skeptical. So having trusted voices as part of that decision making unit or that advisory group, or whether they're within the group or whether they're extraneous but connected, is tremendously powerful.
So if we take that challenge of decreasing attention and we realize that to gain attention, you need trust, and then to be able to generate trust, there has to be authenticity. I think that's one thing that I think AI is kind of maybe leading us a bit astray there because
Yeah.
it allows us to fake authenticity to some degree. We're able to scale many conversations at once, um, and then I think it boils down also to the question of value. So I'm willing to trust somebody that is providing me genuine value if it's information or if it's something like that. And then that completely upends, I think, our approach to go to market, which talks about I will give you information and then give you value, maybe to flip it around, maybe say you have to start with value to be able to gain trust, then attention, then maybe get to that, business side of it.
Well, so look, I think you're right, Abhishai, but I'm a recovering print journalist, right? I'm trying to get over those days, right? So I believe that you provide you build trust first, and then it provides you the opportunity, or the um opportunity is probably the best word. Yeah, it definitely should start from that perspective.
Mhm. Amazing. Yeah, I think that we were talking about those opportunities, maybe looking at 25 and some of the things that you've came across, maybe if it's from working with members of the community. What are things that maybe stuck in your mind, or some examples of things that you find work, or even on the other side, things that you thought would work and didn't work, and you would recommend kind of maybe trying those approaches or staying away from them?
Well, I think to the point around right, and I'm going to say something here, which is I'm going to be mindful that I could be upended by my own monologue earlier on around vendors and snake oil and all that kind of stuff. But um, the marketing but it does place the point about trust and authenticity. Um, you know, we've seen more a resurgence of the term community in the last 5 years, and I think this is very much for that reason. You want to have a place where you can trust members, your peers within that group, and it can give you a level of authenticity and value that you wouldn't be able to get outside of that forum. Um, but then, and building on that, what I think we've definitely seen this year is the level of influencer marketing coming to the floor. I think there's been so many false dawns for influencer marketing in the last 10 years. Like I've lost track of that times. People said, oh, it's going to break through in B2B this year, and it never has. Whereas this year, um, you got some big, and actually to an extent last year as well, I had some really big people weighing behind it. LinkedIn have recognized that what their platform delivers is influencer marketing, and they built some tools or a particular tool to allow that, and credit to them for realizing it. And LinkedIn's ubiquity in B2B marketing, I mean, it's hard to imagine something like that failing when LinkedIn are enabling it. So that's a big deal, and you're starting to see service providers setting up in that regard, trying to kind of build a kind of infrastructure around influencer marketing to make that a viable way to go to market. It's been too fragmented and too piecemeal to date, but we're starting to see that come to the fore. So I think that's something which if you're not already investigating for your marketing for 2025, you should be. It might be that it's hard to quantify, but have a look. There are a couple of examples on the B2B marketing. We announced the B2B marketing awards last month, and there were some examples in there of influencers. I also did a blog talking about one of my newsletters rather, talking about some of the five kind of campaign channels and technique trends, and there was an example in that as well. Where we can put a link at the bottom in this. If it's okay, Avishai, we can link up to that post if that's helpful to people. So I think for the reasons I said earlier on, influencer marketing in terms of that addressing that issue of authenticity and trust, because inherently the influencer is valuable because you trust them, is a strategy which is worth investigating.
And do you tie that also to this rising role of brand and the need to kind of reshift or do maybe a rebalancing of the emphasis that we used to put on what's called kind of demand capture versus the aspect of demand creation of just getting out there? Do you place that in that, or do you place that across the entire kind of gamut of the buying journey? That
So
makes sense.
yeah, it does make sense. I'm a little bit of a problem with the kind of everything's going to be about brand conversation because
Right.
it can't be. Because I mean, what it should be that brand is about everything rather than everything's about brand, if that makes sense. Because it's not, there is a danger that people who often talk most passionately about brands because they're trying to sell advertising solutions, not because they're trying to necessarily answer your problems in the most objective way possible. And for me, the brand is something that's delivered on multiple touch points throughout a buyer journey, long before you've even know who they are, as you eloquently said earlier on, long before you know who they are. So and it's delivered to all of those individuals, and so it's not about advertising; it's about consistency, clarity, authenticity of message on those numerous touch points before and after you actually sign them as a customer. So that's where you should be investing. I'm not saying don't do brand advertising, but you don't. But I am absolutely saying don't stop all your demand generation and custom and CX stuff and invest in brand because you'd be insane, in my opinion.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying basically this is more of an infrastructure rather than a stage that you say, okay, we are doing now brand, and then we're moving them to another
Yeah,
aspect that has to kind of go and percolate across every interaction that you're going to
yeah,
have with your
yeah.
market. That is going to be your voice, your, who you are essentially, and how you're presented to them, right?
Yeah, and I mean there are opportunities where you should be investing in your brand, doing a brand refresh, doing a rebrand, launching new products. So there are opportunities to invest in brand, but it's not to say that demand generation or worse still, CX is dead, because it's not. It's absolutely not. It's really, really vital. And many of those, you build your impressions. The brand is something. For me, the best definition of brand is the sum total of all your opinions and feelings about an organization and its products and services based on all of the interactions that you have with it. There's not just a piece of advertising, it's about all of those micro touch points that you have and all your colleagues have and the collective wisdom that ensues. And so all those things have got to be good because we live in an omni-channel, always on world at the moment. And you won't necessarily be able to, as a buyer, be able to quantify where that negative impression came from that you where
Right.
you had a bad experience and you didn't like what they did or trust what they said or how they did it.
So I think always a tricky part in that is those difficult conversations, let's say with a CFO as a code word that says, I get maybe they get we need to invest in it, but there has to be a way to maybe explain why we're investing this amount and what do we expect out of it in a more demonstrable way. Do you find
Yeah.
that as well? Is that a challenge? And how would you address this conversation, maybe?
What I mean, investing in brand.
Yeah, I mean, how would you, in
Yeah.
terms of accountability, you're saying, okay, yeah, we need to divide
Yeah.
up the pie. We have that
Yeah.
budget.
Yes.
And again, we understand that's maybe an infrastructure, but how do we know that's working? How do we know
Yeah.
the brand is working?
Well, how do you know the brand is working? Well, there's metrics like share of voice and there's like searchability and things like that, that speak to the brand. But you know, investment in brand is about addressing a problem, right? What is the problem that you're facing? Is it about visibility? Is it that there's competitors in the market? Whatever. That's there has to be a very clear business case for that. But there has to be an understanding that it's not going to deliver results tomorrow. It's not, or even the next day, or probably the day after that. So it's all about long term. And one of the challenges for me around because brands are essential and fundamental to B2B, right? I can't, I'm not an idiot. I'm not complaining anything else. But whereas marketing leadership's tenure is not often is less than the sales cycle of the product they're selling. So therefore, you know, if marketers have, exactly as you said earlier on, marketers have to demonstrate um, a that they're having an impact. If they're not able to demonstrate having an impact, then what the hell are they doing there? They're not there anymore. So they've got to do something which demonstrates that. So if they're making a bet that's only going to pay off a year after they've left their job, it doesn't stack up very well. So there are things that there are metrics that you can and should be using. We did an analysis of this in the B2B Marketing Awards entries. We get hundreds of entries to the B2B Marketing Awards every year. The metrics, the ability to people to demonstrate value on brand-based campaigns was much harder than it was for demand-based demand. And when I say demand, I'm meaning ABM as well. I'm including that as a two sides. As you said earlier, there's the two sides of that equation in broad terms. And sometimes the metrics that we use to justify the brand side of the equation were demand side metrics. So it's all a bit mixed up. And we need to understand that there's no clear line for any of these things. But we just need to treat the kind of the evangelizing by certain parties with a little bit of caution. That's what I'm saying.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that one of the things that we were seeing is in that honest and open conversation with leadership about what can and what can't be measured. I think we also need to say, and this is coming from a vendor that sells analytics as also as part of their offering. Not everything can be measured. Not everything can be attributed. There are investments that need to happen, like you would do in R&D and things that you would just need for the system to scale, right? We all understand that when it comes to maybe to product and tech, we're less, I think, accommodating when it comes to things like marketing because we expect that kind of coin operated. I think John Miller calls it, the gumball machine, right? I put in,
Yeah,
I expect to get that out in an X
yeah,
amount of time. If not, then it's not working. Um, but we've also been after a pretty difficult couple of years, right? These past 2.5, 3 years, in terms of the economic climate, in terms of the ability to execute. So I think there has been some mixture between things are not working and things are bad in general, or things are just not working the way that we're doing it. There has been this kind of mixture, and it's a bit similar to the heydays of 21, where everything we were doing was working, right? So, in that time we felt like everything is golden and we're crushing it, and we felt so we're great. And now there's that. Do you see that shift as well? And do you also start maybe to see the pendulum swing back to kind of a different mindset, especially after the
yeah.
conference last month?
Yeah, I think you expressed it really well. You know, when the good times are happening in 21, particularly when it was in digital, was just they were flying. You know, everything was it was kind of it was golden all the way, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas the last kind of year, certainly, I mean, I think in the US it's a bit of a different, but in the UK, in Europe, it's been a trickier 12 months certainly. In terms of the mood music and the kind of general sense of sentiment in the market, it feels a little bit more positive. We had a roundtable with agencies last week, and they most of them were saying there's more conversations going on. It's busy right up till Christmas. You know, in the UK certainly we have quite a big Christmas break. Most companies have the time off between Christmas and New Year, or at least if they are working, it's that were at a pretty low level. So there's a bit of a rush to the end, you know, and then which sometimes is quite good because what it does is catalyzes people to actually take some decisions. It's not just to continue and they go, oh God, I've got to. When everyone comes back in January, I've got to actually have a campaign going. So it's quite a good thing. So there's a bit of a sense of that, but I'm not. This is not a scientific study. I'm not suggesting that for a second. I think there's still a bit of bad news to work through the system, but I feel like the US election's out of the way now. We have a bit of clarity about that. I remain I'm optimistic that the future will gradually improve.
Hmm. Yeah. And one last question that I have to you, is that, I think for many years we've always been hearing about consolidation and technology. We've been hearing about this trend, but in effect, we're actually seeing quite the opposite. We're seeing more fragmentation, maybe more specialization in that sense. Where do you see this going? Not just maybe also from a tech perspective, but also maybe from skills or service perspective. Do you see more of that fragmentation or consolidation? Where do you see things kind of heading?
It's a really good question. I mean, I like totally like you. I just assumed that the whole Martech alliance, Martech ecosystem was just going to start to kind of do that, which wouldn't have been a bad thing because it seems I couldn't imagine that it's anything but oversupplied. But then all of a sudden, in the last kind of couple of months, I've had meetings with a load of startups in London, which is not necessarily as hot a place as something like Silicon Valley, or I think even Israel to a degree, as is kind of per capita, right? Um, in terms of kind of Martech startups, and I kind of asked one of them why, and they were like, "Well, AI has just democratized things. You know,
Mm,
it's kind of giving you the ability to write code without having to have tremendous VC backing, and you can get to a start line a lot easier. And it does seem like a little bit like some of the purse strings have been loosened a bit from the VC or the PE community a bit, which is good. So yeah, I think it is going to continue to proliferate. And that's not necessarily all good news because you will have to have a strategy first approach to adopting technology, and sometimes people just buy technology, don't understand the need it's trying to solve. But at the same time, from the flip side of actually, startups drive innovation, and most of the big vendors grow by acquiring the stuff they couldn't build themselves. They weren't agile enough, so it renews the market. So you know, I think it's exciting. It's exciting to see people coming with new ideas. That's what one of the things that makes marketing such a fascinating industry.
yeah, it actually reminds me when cloud started to become a thing and building SaaS, right, became so much easier than doing things on-prem. And it had this Cambrian explosion that suddenly everybody say, well, actually, I can put it on the cloud. I
Yeah,
just need a few developers. And now with AI, it's even more accelerated. But then again, going back to the question of how many solutions do we actually need? How many vendors and how much noise are they all going to create and competing for? Again, those budgets aren't growing at the same pace as the number of startups. That isn't growing at that same rate. So it's definitely is going to be probably a very interesting couple of years ahead of us there.
I agree. Maybe the solution. I don't know if this is true or not, but it becomes so niche that you're getting very very niche solutions targeting a very finite market, and that's why it'll work out. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, fascinating question.
Amazing. Well, on that note, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to speaking. This was really a fascinating conversation and a true pleasure. And for those who are not following, I urge you get into b2bmarketing.net, get in the community. Amazing events, great thought leadership there, and really helpful on more topics in ABM. So on that, yeah, would really like to thank you again, Joel, and we'll meet around in the conferences, hopefully.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Cheers.